in the process of standing for truth, yes, it is important to know, as a Christian in particular, where the boundaries lie in our rhetoric. I wanted to take a moment and address Matt Walsh's comments about Dylan Mulvaney. Now, I personally have watched many videos out there of the various conservatives, both in question by Matt Walsh and also people just weighing in on the area. And I want to mention some very important things. So here we go.
Okay, so that was Tim Pool, Jeremy from the YouTube channel The Quartering, Sydney Watson, Amala Ekpanobi from PragerU, and the guys from the podcast Trigonometry. Now, one thing I want to be clear about here is that I'm not mad at any of these people. There are no hard feelings. We can disagree and all that. It's fine. I could have done without the snideness and the lame cheap shot from the Trigonometry guys at the end, especially in a video where they're supposed to be lecturing me about the value of taking the high road. Okay, when you're going to do that, you can't start the video by insulting me, but we'll leave that to the side for now. Instead, all I'd like to do is address the overarching criticism one last time. First, you'll notice the connecting thread. Okay, they all agree that I'm right, that what I said is factually correct, but they think that it goes too far by saying it out loud. Mulvaney's the one running around like some cartoon of a woman, passing out tampons in the women's room and meeting with the president to defend the mutilation of children, but I went too far. Well, see, this is where we differ, because in the culture war, I don't think it's possible to go too far by speaking truth. The truth is the truth. It is what it is. It's the reality. Are we going to defend it, or are we going to conceal it? Are we going to embrace it, or are we going to hide from it?
You can go too far. Then the reason you can go too far is not necessarily that you're denying the truth. That's not what we're talking about here. The question is, what is the objective of sharing the truth, right? The objective of the truth is realignment. If you think about it that way, right? The reason why we speak the truth to each other is because as embodied individuals with varying perceptions, there is ultimate, real, knowable truth that is objective. But everyone's perception of ultimate truth is colored. And so the reason that we speak the truth is so that we can, in a sense, learn to coordinate what we're speaking and the angle we're getting at, so that we work each other towards a closer and closer understanding of the ultimate truth, which is Jesus Christ himself. Now, as we'll hear, we don't hear any pivoting to the idea that truth is not merely for the purpose of, being basically one-upping the other person or trumping the other person. There's a reason for truth, but Matt has a different perspective that we will hear shortly.
You can't have it both ways. When it comes to gender ideology, the truth is ugly. It is brutal and harsh and disgusting. I wish it wasn't that way, but it's correct. I didn't make it that way. I didn't create the ugliness. I'm merely pointing to it and saying, look at this. Look at it for what it is.
Now, that is a correct concept of what we should do, is that when a truth is ugly, which is, in a sense, it's shedding light on error, is really what Matt is saying. That is very, very difficult to take for anyone. Doesn't matter, though, in the sense that we must expose things into the light and then go from there. And so Matt's not wrong in describing that the fact of speaking truth isn't going to result in a problem. If you're declaring the truth, it exposes error, and that is a good thing.
But you would rather that I soften the blow a little bit, that I dress the truth up to make it prettier, more palatable. You want me to lie to protect the feelings of our enemies.
Now, I don't know if most conservatives who have taken a position on Matt Walsh's thoughts here have ever suggested that he would lie or obfuscate the truth. That's not been part of conservatives' questioning. It's whether or not the objective is being met. And we're going to go into that more, but just pointing that out.
And make no mistake, Dylan Mulvaney is our enemy. He is an open, visible, active, and passionate advocate for the abuse of children, the war on fundamental truth, and the destruction of human society as we know it.
Dylan Mulvaney is not inherently the enemy as a human, right? The enemy is his ideology. And when he, as a person, presents himself as his ideology, he is, in the sense, playing the role of the adversary. And certainly he is the truth that he's claiming is setting himself up against the very nature and order of God, which means he's in error, and yes, he is the enemy of God. But the question is whether or not Dylan Mulvaney is the enemy or his beliefs. And this is where, when we discuss any kind of argumentation, that we need to, and just difference of opinion, we need to understand the most important thing. The person themselves is not your enemy. What they believe is the enemy. And as they essentially align themselves, they are playing the role of the enemy. But inherently, who they are is not the enemy. That's an important distinction that has not been made with Matt. And that's what I think a lot of people are pointing to. It seems that it's an ad hominem form of argumentation that Matt Walsh is taking, is that it's the entirety of that individual is wrapped up into their identity. Now, that is certainly the way they see themselves, that they are nothing but the deception that they unfortunately are ensnared in, enslaved to. But that is not actually the truth. And the most important thing is that we need to look through the mind of Christ and the eyes of Christ. And Christ does not see them as that kind of enemy. He sees them as the enemy of the truth and of God, but as the individual, he knows who made them. He knows how Dylan Mulvaney was knit. He knows every hair on Dylan Mulvaney's head. And he knows who Dylan Mulvaney truly is to his spirit. This is the difference between what doesn't seem nuanced position, and we'll get into exactly why I think Walsh's position doesn't and will not equate to a nuanced position, at least from a Christian worldview.
You wish to defeat this man in a manner that will not make him feel bad about himself, but I'm here to tell you that you are delusional. I'm not going to protect your feelings any more than I'll protect his. You are deluding yourself. We got into this position in our culture precisely by valuing politeness over truth. We got here by doing exactly as you would have me continue doing.
I don't actually think that's how we got here, preferring politeness over truth, because the reality is the left doesn't actually, they're not polite at all to the left or to the right. And more specifically, they're not even polite to themselves. So that is a faulty analysis, that the reason we got here is preferring politeness out of truth. Now, that is somewhat the reason that the world has gone haywire, in the sense that Christians pursue politeness over truth. And that is the truth. That right there is part and parcel. Now, there's deeper reasons that go far beyond just the idea of politeness, but to summarize it that succinctly, that's really the reason we went wrong, is not only an error, it's just not true. And so this is an important thing to point out.
And what you blame me for not doing. We got here by refusing to speak the plain truth and by allowing the AntiTruth Brigade to emotionally blackmail us into silence. They use their own mental fragility as a cudgel to beat us into submission.
They do.
That's the threat, right? And we let them get away with it.
We
or
do.
You do anyway. I won't. Second, you say that I'm not going to convince the other side with this kind of rhetoric. But here's what you have to understand. This is very important. Convincing the other side is not my primary objective. This is the core difference between you and me.
Now, he just said that, right? He just said there's no intent from him to convince the other side, and that is the core difference. And so when we talked about what's the intent of speaking truth, for him it's not transformation. But let's see what's at the bottom of that.
I'm not looking to reach an understanding with these people. I'm not interested in compromise and dialogue.
So is helping the other person requiring compromise? When someone looks at a counterfeit dollar bill and assumes it's the real thing, and when we show them where their analysis of their bill is actually a counterfeit, have we changed our position? Have we compromised our position by telling the other person who thought they had a real dollar bill that they actually have a counterfeit? And we show them where that is. We haven't changed our fundamental position. And we haven't given ground simply by pointing out that difference. And more specifically, we haven't lost anything by politely showing where they went wrong, or where their reality, their perception of their dollar was not in alignment with the true dollar. Here's how you can tell the difference. See, this is an important point that is, again, a problem with Matt's assessment of the situation. And so we continue.
For those who castrate children and attack the very concept of truth and erode the foundations of human civilization, my goal is to defeat and humiliate and demoralize them.
Defeat, humiliate, and demoralize. Now, defeat in the sense of the arguments, that is a biblical construct. Defeat as in terms of if they are deliberately already committing crimes against our children, then they deserve punishment, as in prison. They deserve an actual sentence by law because of their egregious infraction of not only our law, but the ultimate ethic. And that there is where we defeat through bringing what? Justice, which is corresponding to truth. But it's not inherently disconnected from these things in simply defeating it, as in the destruction of their position, and in a sense of their being. That only happens when every mean is exhausted in that individual's life, as in they have been properly brought on charges, they've been approved and convicted, and then in that process they've been given a chance to repent spiritually and ethically of their wrongdoing, but they refuse. They not only will die physically, or in a sense receive a long-term punishment for something, but they will also receive a judgment from God. And that judgment, unfortunately, will be harsh. Much, much, much harsher and more torturous than anything that we can come up with here. And that is biblical. But the question is the objective purely to only do that, Or are there people on the fringe, not just Dylan Mulvaney, but people who advocate for Dylan Mulvaney's, who need to be won back? And more specifically, they need to be transformed in a different form of trans, right? In the ultimate biblical sense of transformation, which is internal through the Spirit. That is something that we should be looking for. And the defeat of the world system and the argumentation that sets itself up against the very nature of God. But we look for the defeat of the argument, but for the individual, we look for something different. We look for actual transformation. We look for helping them repent and turn and restore them to a right mind, the mind of Christ. This is what we should be looking for. Unfortunately, Matt Walsh doesn't share that, and there are some theological reasons why, which I'll touch on momentarily.
Okay, I want to destroy everything they stand for. The other side is not interested in compromise. They want nothing less than your unconditional surrender.
I just want to put a little pebble in your ear here, just pebble in your shoe. Just think about this. Remember that Matt Walsh is Catholic. Think about how Catholicism, particularly through the Middle Ages, dealt with error. Now think about what he just said, and you'll see the parallel.
We have to meet them with that same energy, or we will lose or continue losing. And by the way, this is also a good strategy because it rallies people to our side. It emboldens the troops. It lets people know that it's okay to speak up and to speak truthfully. You know, it's often said that that you shouldn't preach to the choir. That's basically what they were saying at the end of that clip there. Just pandering. He's pandering to his own audience. This is a message that's meant for his own audience. Well, God forbid I speak to my own audience on my podcast.
The question is, when you reach out and direct your focus to the individual in question who is in slavery to sin, that's not your audience. And so this is an anti-Christian worldview, anti-Christ, that Matt Walsh is articulating. And it's a Catholic framework. It's not unusual to a true, genuinely honest Roman Catholic. And Matt Walsh is living out his Catholic worldview. You can't not live out, if you're true Catholic, the conclusion is there is no grace outside the Catholic Church. You are damned to hell. And more specifically, once you're excommunicated, you could never return back to grace. There is no way to repent and return after there's an official declaration. And so when you're talking about who determines the damnation of these individuals, yes, in fact, there should be punishment legally, but spiritually, who does that? That's the problem. It's not Jesus who does that. It's leadership. It's those in power who believe they have that ability given by God, which is false. And that's where some of this comes from. We're going to listen to a little more.
No, preaching to the choir is a good thing. We need to do more of it. Because if the choir is demoralized and scared and cowering in silence, then you damn well better preach to them. What kind of congregation can you hope to have when even the choir is too afraid to sing? In our choir, those who agree with us, the many millions of them, have been cowed into submission. They are nervous. They are timid, like you. And then you come along and say that we should ignore them and instead tailor our message for a group that hates us and will hate us no matter what we say or do? This is not just morally wrong, it's also terrible strategy. Okay? It is a dumb strategy. In fact, it's exactly what the churches have done for decades. And it's why most of them are dying. They water down their preaching to appeal to the crowd, a crowd that isn't interested in the message, no matter how softly it's peddled. And while at best, because they did that, they bore to death and at worst actively alienate the very people who are actually sitting in the pews.
Now, some of his analysis there about the church, in that they have watered down the message so as to be more appealing, is true. That is very true. That there has been a watering down of truth as the primary thing because the church has embraced this culture of postmodernism and of post-truth, in the sense that, well, we don't want to distance ourselves from people who, whatever. Well, that's not biblical either.
So that's what the churches do. The people sitting in the pews who come to hear it, and then they give their preaching, which is designed to appeal to people who are outside the building and not even sitting there.
There are a lot of churches who unfortunately soften the gospel, assuming that they're might be talking to someone who's already had this happen. And it's like, no, we have to get God's perspective on the word. And when we soften the message internally, we weaken their ability to understand the severity that God sees sin, and which weakens our ability to see the greatness of God's grace offered through his Son. And this is what Matt Walsh misses in his presentation. Now we're going to listen to a little bit more. Let's see how this goes.
But the people that are outside the building, they don't come in to hear any more of it. Instead, the people that were actually sitting there get up and leave. Conservatism has made the same mistake. And at what point do we learn the lessons that our own recent history seeks to teach us? Now, you say that we can't win hearts and minds by being nice. Because, by the way, I'm not saying that we're only preaching to the choir. That's not it. We also do want to convince people. But guess what? You don't convince people by being nice. You don't. At least not on a cultural level. I mean, where did you get this idea? Where did you arrive at this conclusion? That the way to win the culture is by being nice. Is that how the left won the culture? Have you been paying attention at all?
So what have we learned here? Here's the thing. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Part of his grace was his truth, and part of his truth was grace. And here's the thing. We as human beings who are on this planet, our goal here, especially if you are a Christian, is to align ourselves to how God has determined us to function. And part of that is to co-align ourselves. Part of that is to help each other align ourselves to God's righteous standard. And that is the truth. The truth. We are to manifest God's truth and proper order for life. And so Matt, in the sense, is correct in standing for some of the things that God declares are righteous and standing against the things that God calls unrighteous and an evil and a distortion of himself. But the problem is that there is also God's nature that of his grace. And his grace is that which does not want a single person to perish. The individual soul that we're speaking to is not for condemnation until he gets to the bema seat before God himself. He is the righteous judge. God makes the difference. But the difference is we stand for truth and we offer grace, and the grace that comes through Christ alone. I'm Cody Adams for Storyscape Design.